Welcome back. You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Brendan Cole. Last month there was jubilation in Cairo's Tahrir Square when Mohammed Morsi was declared winner of the Egyptian election after a historic revolution. But coming out of its secular past, Egypt is coming to terms with just how much it should be calibrated to Islam. Last month the mob assaulted women holding a march demanding an end to sexual harassment in Cairo as attackers overwhelmed female supporters. There are also reports that women are being harassed for not wearing veils, and some fundamentalists are calling for sex segregation on buses and in workplaces. Mohammed Morsi must appease both powerful secular military as well as dominant Islamist groups. Meanwhile, this week, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said the Obama administration's future relationship with Mohammed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood would depend on how they respect the rights of women, as well as other minorities. Men and women both protested alongside each other to overthrow the previous regime. But what is the role of women in the wake of the Egyptian revolution? Do they have fewer rights overall since the overthrow of the previous leader Hosni Mubarak? Well, to discuss this, joining me is Dina Wahba. She's an Egyptian feminist. Also with me is the director of the Egyptian House in London, Mustafa Ragab, and Dr Usama Hasan. He's a senior researcher in Muslim studies at the Quilliam think tank. He's also served as an imam at East London's Leighton Mosque. Well, I'll start with you, Dina. How has Egypt changed for women since the revolution?
Well, I don't think much has changed in any aspect, not only in regards to women. I mean, we have seen women and youth being greatly marginalized just right after the revolution, from the constitutional assemblies that have been changing or from the elections. Or I don't think it has been in any way good for promoting women's rights till now. And I think it would have been naive of us to expect that just because women participated in the revolution, they will automatically get the rights. But women have been excluded from the parliamentary election to a great extent, from all of the constitutional assemblies, and from the public life in general. The patriarchal political structures are still standing. Nothing has changed much, and the marginalization of youth and women is something to be expected.
Mustafa Ragab, what do you make of the role of women post-revolution?
Whoever you are, wherever you are, nobody is going to give you your rights unless you go for it, unless you fight for it, unless you ask for it. But what we say here, that after the revolution, when women showed a great participation in the revolution, I will expect that we need a lot of changes in Egypt. And these changes were going to be happen through the media, through education. We do have a problem. We have this problem is not just in Egypt. The problem exists everywhere. It exists in the UK, exists all over Europe. So the minority of people who are doing these things, which normally the media will expose that, but we have to deal with this problem, especially women's rights, and women have to lead in doing that.
Usama Hasan from the Quilliam think tank, you've spoken publicly about women's rights, Islamic women's rights in particular, in the UK. What kind of reception did you get?
Well, I served as an imam at a Salafi mosque in London for 25 years. My background is Salafi, and Salafis tend to be ultra-conservative when it comes to women's rights. So at the mosque, I actually didn't address it directly. I addressed these issues in other platforms, but of course, in the age of the internet, people found out what I was saying elsewhere, and that was one of the reasons I was actually forced out of the mosque. Although in the wider Muslim community and in the wider British community, my comments and my ideas have been welcomed, especially by Muslim feminists. There is a growing body of devout Muslim women in this country and across the West, and in fact across the world, who are devout but are also demanding their rights, and they want equality, full gender equality with men within the framework of Islam. So it's a very interesting debate that's going on at the moment.
And just for the benefit of our listeners, what were some of the comments that you made?
Well, I suppose two levels. On the deeper level, I agree with the reformers who say actually the Quran and Islam was trying to bring about full gender equality, but in gradual stages, so that Muslims have to continue that struggle. And whereas passages of the Quran which are totally gender equal, there are other passages which are clearly not gender equal, but they should be seen as a stepping stone towards the ultimate ideal, which is full human equality, including gender equality. But in terms of examples, there are many traditional jurists who say things like a woman cannot marry without the permission of her father or brother, for example, that women must be covered top to toe at all times. I argued that the Quran teaches modesty and decency, and norms of dress have always been adapted to local situations. So in Western countries, for example, or in many modern countries, the whole issue of the veil and the headscarf should be discussed and debated, and perhaps it's not entirely necessary in Western societies. Now that caused a lot of uproar, the fact that I even broached these subjects and opened them up, but I was doing it from an authentic classical viewpoint of Islamic law.
Sorry, I need to say, Usama, in the early days of Islam, women had the full rights. And now
Yes.
all these groups that are coming in are bringing things and putting more judgment in women and more restriction in women, which didn't exist in the early days of Islam. And when your responsibility as an imam, or all the imams in the mosques, because of course there is an influence going from the imams to the people.
Yes.
And I don't think the imams are doing the job that will give women the rights, because some of them in the mosque during the khutbah will say the wrong things. And this is, very, very important. The imams and the priests
Yes.
in their positions have a great, great role to play in the society by putting these things right.
I entirely agree, and in fact that is something I was trying, and I'm still continuing, of course. There is a lot of opposition, of course. Conservative ideas, male-dominated societies, patriarchal societies have developed over centuries in the Muslim lands,
But-
as you say.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Brendan Cole. We're discussing the fate of women in the aftermath of the Egyptian revolution. With me to discuss this is Dr Usama Hasan. He's a senior researcher at the think tank, the Quilliam Foundation, and he served as an imam at Leighton Mosque in East London for 25 years. Dina Wahba is an Egyptian feminist, and Mustafa Ragab, director of the London-based culture centre Egyptian House. But just drawing a comparison with what's happening in Egypt, Dina Wahba, is it any surprise that Usama speaks about putting these ideas out in a Western society such as the United Kingdom? Is it any surprise that there's a resistance to ideas of women equality in Egypt?
Not at all. And actually, drawing on this point, I agree completely with what Mr. Mustafa said about the problem of women rights or if gender equality exists everywhere, and it does exist in the West. And I'm not in any way, I'm not under any illusion that the West is the haven for women rights and women equality, while the East or the underdeveloped or the third world countries are not. I have to also say that, and on the note, commenting on Mr. Mustafa's notes about fighting for rights, I have to say that I have had the privilege of meeting militant young women and older generation feminists, of course, fighting very hard for their rights. I have had the privilege of going within the parliamentary elections, campaigning for a 26-year-old Coptic woman in Upper Egypt, which is an ultra-conservative region, to be in the parliament and fighting within supposedly a progressive party to be on the party list, on the top 3 of the party list, so she can get into the parliament. And surprisingly, all her village were behind us, and all her campaigners were men, and the priest of her village was actually one of her strongest campaignner's, and this draws upon the important role that imams and priests play. But I have to say that imams like Dr. Usama here are minority, and I think he would know that. And
I think this is where the problem is. That the minority of the imams are doing the right job, and the majority of the imams and the priests, I must say as well, are not putting the right message to the society.
Well, their religious establishments have never been a very strong ally of women's rights in general. And I completely empathize with a lot of initiatives of women having to fight for their rights within the Islamic framework, even though I have to say that there is in the West a trend to see it as the only authentic framework for third world feminists or feminists coming from the Middle East in order to advance their rights. I'm personally a secular-oriented feminist, but I have to say I totally respect Islamic feminists as well.
But the campaign that you were referring to was a Coptic candidate, a female Coptic
Yes.
candidate. Hillary Clinton referred to Coptic Christians as among the minorities that need to be taken care of under this new Mohammed Morsi regime.
Well, I don't believe this at all. Actually, in the press conference that Hillary Clinton had when she first visited Egypt after Mohammed Morsi was extremely toned down when it comes to Coptic minorities and women. She said women and then she moved on. I don't believe that American support to Mubarak depended on minorities and women's rights. They will support Mohammed Morsi if he supported their interests. The comment about the military being secular is something that is extremely contested as well. The military is a patriarchal, ultra-conservative institution. It never has been an ally of women's rights. And I have to say that envisioning the military as the haven for secular-oriented people or revolutionaries who would go to vis-a-vis the Muslim Brotherhood is something extremely problematic.
Yes, I agree with Dina there, because politician depends on what deals they're doing. They will support Morsi or against Morsi. It depends what deals they will do with Morsi. If Morsi will do what they want.
So you don't believe the sentiment of Hillary Clinton when she says that the US would be trying to promote the rights of minorities, including women?
No chance. No way. No way. You know, do you talk about human rights? There is no human rights. They talk about women rights. They talk what suits them at the time. If the people who are gonna give them the deals they want, they will support their ideas. That's why I believe in politicians. And going back to the point that Dina was talking about, parliamentary election, there's a lot of dirty games played in these elections, and unless you can play the game in the same way, you never win.
Yeah, I just wanted to widen that point. We've heard this before. I remember after 9/11 when the Labour government here was going into war, helping to invade Afghanistan with the Americans. Harriet Harman famously said, we're going to help the women of Afghanistan. and of course, 10, 11 years later, the situation is perhaps worse. But there's a wider issue. It's not just Egypt. I've been to Egypt 3 times. I've been privileged to meet several Egyptian women feminists there. And they had a few leading Islamic scholars from around the world helping their work also. I had an American friend at the university who lived in Egypt for a while, and he loved it, but he said it was very difficult for his wife, being an American woman. And that's something you hear all the time in Saudi Arabia as well. Expats will say a lot of Arab and Muslim men think that if a woman is not wearing a headscarf or if she's Western, she's somehow of loose character, and they hence the increased sexual harassment. But if you look wider, in Muslim majority countries such as Pakistan or Bangladesh or other places, you've still got serious issues with women's rights. But Pakistan and Bangladesh, for example, have had female prime ministers. As far as I know, no Arab country has managed to achieve that yet. So, there are different struggles. I think there are struggles for gender equality everywhere. But generally, in Western societies, in normal day-to-day interaction, European and American societies are far more advanced in terms of women's rights and participation in public life and political life.
Mustafa, Ragab, are we seeing these reports? Obviously, maybe they're blown out of proportion in the Western media, but reports of women being harassed in Tahrir Square, for instance. Is this perhaps just a symptom of the security forces in disarray? Or is this a real shift in mood towards religious fervour?
It's a mixture of both, really. But this is expected after the election, because you cannot deny that those people, the Muslim Brotherhood supporters, before the revolution, they were really under a lot of pressure and they were suffering under the regime. So a few of them will come out now and say, here we are, we can rule, we can do what we want. But thank God they are a minority, otherwise it will be a disaster.
Dina, Wahba, when you were there in Egypt, and you go back a lot, did you hear stories of this kind of moral vigilantism?
Well, actually, I think we are saying very strong things, and I think some of those points need to be disentangled. I'm sorry, I have to go back to Dr. Usama's point about Afghanistan, saving women in Afghanistan, which is very interesting. There's a very famous quote saying in feminism about how white women want to save brown women from brown men. And this has always been a colonial feminist discourse of saving women. I mean, I understand what you mean by day-to-day interactions, but about how the West is more advanced in terms of women's rights, they just have I would see it as they just have different problems. I know that a lot of feminists here are fighting militantly for so many issues in Western countries. I don't know how advanced they would see it.
I think in terms of the vote, we have a statue of Emmeline Pankhurst outside Westminster here. The women's suffragette movement, women got the vote. We have many ministers. We've had Margaret Thatcher, a major British Prime Minister, for example, in this country.
But I think you have I think not more than 20% of the parliament, or even less, are women, which is in some of the Arab countries, it could be even Rwanda has like 50%.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure about that. And the Egyptian suffragette movement as well. I think we got to vote before Switzerland. I think it was in the 50s, and Switzerland was like in the 70s. I'm not sure about the date. I have to go back to sexual harassment, which is a point that's coming up. I have to say that I've always suffered from sexual harassment in Cairo, and I mean suffering because I think it's a strong statement. But I have so many friends who said that even though they were sexually harassed in Cairo verbally, maybe they felt safer in Cairo than many Western cities. And I have to say we have to disentangle sexual harassment from religious fervor, because these are different things. Like you are probably going to be sexually harassed by people who are not necessarily religiously conservative, and then you can be harassed by people who are calling you because you're not veiled, people who are religiously
but specifically
conservative.
with reference to women who are harassed for not wearing the veil, specifically the insults that are not true Muslims. Did you get a sense that is changing, or that's changed since the revolution? Or
Egypt has been going through a process since starting from the 80s of being an very conservative religious society, and you can see the numbers of people who are not wearing the veil really decline, and the street is not exactly a perfect place for you if you're a woman, especially if you're not wearing the proper dress code that is accepted in Egypt. Did it increase after the revolution? Well, there has been a fear that Muslim Brotherhood, Salafis have been working in extremely informal networks, and they are there in the society everywhere. And now that they are more empowered or in power, this could trigger these informal networks and make them feel even more empowered and able to preach or to come to you directly and tell you, why are you doing this? This has been happening before the revolution. Whether this could even increase after, there has been a lot of statements, I have to say, and even official statements of women making official complaints of being harassed in the streets after Morsi is in power because of not wearing the veil, because of this sense of empowerment that these informal networks have been having.
Is it possible to say that maybe women's rights might be quite a Western-style mentality, and if you look at the culture and history of Islamic law, there is strong support for women's rights, and maybe what different women want in Egypt can be different things. They might just want to live their life with dignity in a way that they didn't under Mubarak. I mean, what do you make of that distinction?
Well, I think here we're back again to the point of having the Islamic framework as the only authentic one, which I think is very problematic because Egypt has also had a very strong secular history. I mean, when we talk about an Islamic culture, you talk about, there was a very secular, strong wing in Nasser's time, or even before that, or even before Egypt was there, even before Islam was there. So this is very problematic for me. Having women rights as something that is a Western discourse is extremely problematic. It's like saying human rights is a Western discourse. I have to say there has been, of course, the discourse of colonial feminism, and a lot of Western countries have used the pretense of women rights, like in the Afghanistan case, which even problematized things. But women rights are being easily discredited as Western style, which is, of course, not true. And what the women of Egypt who are fighting relentlessly for is their rights and total gender equality, fighting for respect, fighting for recognition, and they are doing it in every level. I wouldn't say that they want different things. I think they want what is fair for them, and they are fighting on every level. And I have to say, it always amazes me how women are under so many repressive systems of oppression in Egypt are fighting innovatively for their rights.
Usama Hasan, I'd like to turn to you. You mentioned Pakistan has had a female leader. Do you see a similar situation? I guess in Egypt, what's key is what's going to happen under the new constitution, and who's drafting the constitution, and how much Sharia law will be infused into that constitution. That's key to whether or not Egypt gets a female president in the future, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. The place of Sharia in the constitution, it's an issue in Pakistan, it's an issue in Egypt, it's an issue in many Muslim countries. And what do you mean by Sharia? What is very important is to raise the level of debate around these things. I've been very disappointed at the quality of the debate between Islamists and secularists, for example. And I think there is a discourse of universal human rights, divine or secular rights, whatever you want to call them, where people can come together and have a conversation. I coined this term Islamic secularism some years ago, based on the writing of Ibn Khaldun, for example, who was in a sense very liberal and progressive, and understood the difference between the sacred and the secular, and the fact that the sacred was your ideal, but not always could you get that in practice. and you had to have a compromise. And this is drawing on the teaching of the Prophet, for example, who said, "You know your worldly affairs better." So what we really need is honest dialogue and debate between the secular parties and groups, and also the Islamist groups, and to recognize that, for example, Islamists objectify women as much as elements in Western societies where you have a lot of pornography, etc., where they make women into sexual objects. In many ways, many of the Islamists do also by being obsessed with just the way women dress and accusing them of being sexually provocative if they uncover their hair or their face. What we really need is dialogue and debate. And of course, Egypt had a military dictatorship. Many other Arab countries were police states for the last 50 years. It seems to me this is the problem. There's never been open dialogue and debate over these things, and that's what's badly needed. Freedom of expression respectfully, which was always the tradition of Islam for centuries and centuries. And I think that's a challenge for these countries now.
Mustafa Ragab from Egyptian House in London. What do you make of the Constitution, and do you have any confidence in it in terms of delivering a degree of equality for women in the future?
Well, I have my doubts about the committee who are going to design the Constitution itself. And I'm not expecting them to come up with the perfect constitution. But I'll go back to the issue that we're talking about here with women harassment. Women are harassed in the UK, in offices, in places of work, everywhere. But two wrongs don't make a right. But we do not want to say or to paint Egypt that women are harassed there in any bigger scale or any special way. But as I said, it is expected after the revolution and after the election that some people will come out and say, "Hey, we won, and now we have to apply our rules." This is expected, and we have to deal with this. We have a lot of other women in Egypt who can be great leaders. The revolution shouldn't be just on a regime. The revolution should extend and should have a lot of other things under that. We have a lot of things that we need to change.
Dina, do you have any confidence that those reforms can take place? I mean, I'm speaking specifically about the Constitution, but it can also extend to family law, to personal status, to the rights of women in marriage, to the rights of women who want to get divorced.
Well, I have to say that I'm also extremely disappointed by the quality of debate in the Constitution, as Dr. Usama said. But I think it was only expected because the Constitutional Assembly has been assembled only through political balances, not by the fact that there are some scholars. Or I'm not a big fan of an elitist constitution that only have scholars or academics. But I think it has to be real citizens. But I don't think it was only to please some political forces.
We don't need to get a committee to do the constitution. We have professional people who can give us a perfect constitution for the country. But for the government or the military supreme office to bring these people, as you say, from different sections of the community to say we've got a good balance there for people to do a good constitution, I believe that was absolutely wrong. They should have got the professional. Egypt is full of them, and they have made so many constitutions for other countries. So they can bring those people to give us the constitution that we can then be consulted on and vote for or against.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that, but but also I don't trust the current Constitutional Assembly that's only based on political balances and extreme, and it has almost a majority of people who we know, like conservative religious people who we know their position in women's rights and minorities, such as Coptic minorities. I don't trust that their constitution have anything that will promote the role of women. It could also have very could also open very problematic ways into reinterpret Sharia in even more conservative ways. Regarding reforms of personal status law and family law, I think it will be the first thing to go. I think the first thing will happen in the next parliament, if it's also won by Islamists, and I believe it will happen. It's the first thing it will change. Egyptian identity is being contested here after the revolution. There is contestation over what it means to be an Egyptian, and then when Islamists obsessed about dress code, it's only about marking, really. What the first thing that changed in Iran, I'm not a big fan of Egypt's going to be Iran because they are different contexts, but the first thing it did change in Iran is women dress code. It's one of the first laws that have been passed, and if revolutions and the history of revolutions have taught us anything, is that what changes is identity, and women are the markers of identity. So I'm not optimistic at all. I think it will be the first to go in terms of even changing it into more more ultra-conservative, just to pin Egypt as the new Egypt, as the more conservative Islamic-run Egypt.
Can I come back to that? Specifically on the Sharia and the Constitution, what's badly needed is an international debate around Sharia, especially in the Muslim-majority countries. For example, there are gender-equal interpretations of Sharia. On the other hand, there are interpretations of Sharia which you could say are misogynistic. And if you look at Saudi Arabia, Iran, or the Taliban, there's clear examples of that. And what we really need is, again, that open debate. And the religious establishment needs to be independent of government and free. One of the big problems in Muslim-majority countries, of course, religious scholars who feel, the cry for justice, which is in the Quran, and human equality, which is really the spirit of the Quran, they are, in a sense, controlled or co-opted by the government, or people are imprisoned or tortured if they say anything which goes against a dictator. And that's been part of the tragedy of the last century.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. My guests are Dr Usama Hasan, Dina, Wahba, Mustafa, Ragab. And you're convinced that the debate needs to be had about the compatibility of the Quran with the rights of women?
Absolutely. So
and that's not being had at the moment?
It's happening in pockets around the world. It needs to be encouraged. As I said, there are people who interpret the Quran to say, because the Quran does have verses saying, women have half the witness in certain cases, women have half the inheritance, etc. And now there are many people who say it should stay like that. Other reformers will argue that was a revolutionary step for its time in 7th century Arabia. It was way ahead of anywhere in the world. And it was the means of bringing women towards full witness and full inheritance rights. Because even half an inheritance or half a witness was way better than pagan Arabia, where women were less than second-class citizens. They were treated like property, like slaves almost. And just as the Quran has verses about slavery, which if you read them literalistically without thinking of the context, you might say, the Quran endorses slavery. Let's bring back slavery. And some fundamentalists say that, even now. But if you look at it in context, clearly the Quran also encourages the freeing of slaves and treating them well. It was encouraging a process of liberation. Same with women, actually. It was encouraging all that. And there are many teachings of the Prophet and verses of the Quran which say that. And because in the end, Islam is about our relationship with the divine. Islam has always had this very strong, equal and democratic brotherhood and sisterhood idea, the equality of human beings. And it's really important for Muslims to grab that.
That Islam is being hijacked by Islamist groups who just interpreted Islam according to their understanding or according to what they wanted to do. If you leave the ground for them, then the things will grow and problem will become bigger. If you allow those groups to go around and do what they're doing and explain the Quran according to their understanding or according to what they want, then we'll end up with a bigger problem.
Let me explain. I'm not saying leave it to those fundamentalist groups. I'm saying Muslims generally. But many of the younger Azhari scholars are a lot more progressive on women's rights, for example. Same in Saudi Arabia, we're beginning to see some of the younger scholars there. So that needs to be encouraged.
We're running out of time, sadly. I'd just like to finish with you, Dina. The revolution in Egypt was supposed to enfranchise a population. Do you have confidence and are you optimistic that will extend to women in the future?
My current thesis is on gender issues around the Egyptian revolution, and I did some interviews. And I started with this assumption that the revolution in some way empowered women. But I have to say that what I found out is that women who have been fighting, militant women have been fighting for so many years, just brought this sense of empowerment to the revolution and empowered the revolution. What they're going to do is continue to fight. It's going to be even harder, I have to say, after the revolution. But I trust that the women who have been fighting for so many years will still continue to fight for their rights.
But I'd just like to finish by thanking my guests, Dr Usama Hasan, senior researcher at the think tank the Quilliam Foundation, Dina Wahba, an Egyptian feminist, and Mustafa Ragab, director of the London-based culture centre Egyptian House. Thank you for joining me here on The Voice of Russia.